Hey guys, it's Austin here with Red Life. In this video we're going to be talking about how to add a protective finish to your stained wood. In this case it's my headphone stand stained with dark cherry oak, and it is pallet wood, so that's why there's some holes in it. It kind of has a little tear here and there and little crackles in the wood. Now I'll be sharing the link to this design from Onshape in the description, but basically what I did was I started out with a 3D model and I printed it out onto 2D paper, laid it down and cut into the wood after stacking them, which my recommendation is to cut out the pieces before and glue them together, but I didn't do that. Something to learn from. Now what I'm using is a polyurethane oil-based finish, protective finish. It is clear satin, so you can see through it. It'll be a little bit glossy, but it's not too glossy. Your wood stain will actually appear through it much better. And the thing to know about this is an oil-based finish, so there's going to be buildup on the bottom of the can. Per recommendation of the can, it says not to shake it because bubbles will form, and you don't want bubbles in your layers as they're drying, because it'll cause a lot of havoc trying to sand them out and unevenness and repainting. Just make sure you don't shake it. Stir it up with something. I used a plastic knife, but in all reality you could use a wood stick. It would probably be much more efficient. And do not use a foam brush as I did in this video right here. You'll actually see all these bubbles coming up. It's not good. It's a lot of bubbles that happen. Probably stain would be better to use for one of the foam brushes, so I just started using an actual brush. Now another thing to note when it comes to adding your protective finish is to do one face at a time. As you can see, I got a little impatient and started doing the sides, which is bad because it will start to drip. Now you don't want any kind of force of gravity. You want to be flat as possible when you're adding these protective finishes so there's no drip, because in all reality if you have a drip it's going to be unleveled and then you're just going to have to sand it out, which is difficult because you have to do a light sanding, and if that light sanding is too much then you go into your wood stain, as you'll see later in this video. Now I wanted to say that I actually used a jigsaw to cut these out of the wood pallet after I glued them together. Now you can see it probably in the top right, there's a little dent in the head of it. I tried sanding as much as possible, but it's what happens when you use jigsaw through a lot of thick wood. I would recommend personally to try to cut through the layers one at a time and then stack them and glue them. It makes for a much easier transition and just altogether a better time than trying to have to sand stuff out. And as you can tell, it's a very weird shape to try to sand. I had to try to get a couple of those corners and curves. Very different part of sanding for sure. I usually sand more flat surfaces, but as you can tell I'm just using a little sand brick here and just trying to sand it as much as possible. And as you can see here on the right side of the head and probably the left side, you can see some of the areas where I was hitting a little too hard. I don't know if the stain was a little too high or maybe it's not fully level, but I just kind of went a little too hard on it, and next thing I know I kind of lost some of my stain, which was bad, but in all reality I kind of got used to the look, so I didn't do anything to add to it. Now a good thing to note is when you're done finishing, get a lint-free cloth and try to dust as much of that sand that you just sanded off as you can so it doesn't get caught up with the layers and make more unevenness. So you just want to be as clean as possible. And every time you finish with your polyurethane finish, you kind of want to put the cap back on the can. You don't want to let any contaminants get into it, and you don't want to let it just kind of breathe in the air. You just kind of want it to be set in as much as possible. And yeah, when you use this on your hands it'll kind of get a little sticky, but it's nothing you can't really get past. And also, if you don't like the way pallet wood looks, you could always go for putting wood filler into the holes so it doesn't look so distressed. I personally like it distressed, and since it's going to be used indoors for me, the only problem I have with would be dropping it maybe, and that's why I'm adding this protective finish. But in all reality, since it's inside, you really even don't need a protective finish. You could easily, because since it shouldn't be getting any contact with water, you could easily just leave the stain and be done with it. And a thing to remember about the finishes here is you want to give it time to dry before you start sanding again. On mine it said about 4 hours to dry, but I gave it about, I want to say 5 to 6 hours just to make sure it was fully set, so when I sand it, it's not anything bad. And once I got to a little bit of a rough texture, I would start to paint on it again after I wiped away all the sand. After the second coat, it was good to go. I didn't need to sand it anymore, and it was just there. I'm probably going to try to add a base to it in the future, but that's for next time. Thank you guys. Thanks for watching.